how to make or how I made a convertible crib. Let's get into it. Let's get started with some air-dried red oak. I roughly measured and marked each piece I'd use for the frames of the crib panels as well as the feet framework, being sure to overestimate about 1/4 of an inch from final dimensions. Then, using the centermost rough marks on each board as my guide, I ripped the pieces small enough to fit on the jointer. After that, I got to squaring the lumber. Once square, I let these freshly cut pieces rest for a few days before I took them down to final dimension, allowing them to acclimate to avoid warping. While those rested, I set about the same process for the lumber I'd use for all the beveled spindles. After they'd had their nap, it was time to rip all the pieces I'd use for the crib panel frames down to size. I'll leave some basic dimensions below, or for greater detail, I'll link the plans in the description. I used the crosscut sled to then cut the frame boards to length. For the spindles, I worked in reverse order, cutting the squared pieces to length before ripping each spindle to its final 1 1/4 inch by 1 1/4 inch width. To create the bevel, I set the table saw to 45 degrees and ran each freshly cut spindle corner through the blade. With those roughed out, I got to work hardening any cracks, checks, and knots with CA glue and accelerator. Then sanded the surfaces flush, taking them to finish level. With the spindles out of the way, I got to piecing together the frame of the crib panels. I started with the 8 vertical frame pieces, measuring and marking 2 inches from either end to start laying out the recesses for the hardware. Grouping these vertical pieces in pairs, I marked the center points along the lines on one of the pieces of the pair. We'll call this kind of piece type A. Then rotated the other piece 90 degrees, used the 2-inch line as my guide, marked the new face, and marked another point 3/4 of an inch from what would later become the outside of the frame. We'll call this piece in the pair type B. With all the vertical pieces marked, I took all of the type A's over to the drill press. Using a 3/4 inch Forstner bit, I drilled a recess about 1/4 inch into the wood, the same depth as the head of the bolt that would soon live there. Then, in the center of that recess, drilled a pilot hole as a guide for the 3/8 Forstner bit that would clear the rest of the way for the bolt. With all the type A's drilled, I got to work making the long-sided panels by laying out the form of the frame before marking every butt joint at 3/4 of an inch inset. These marks would be the guide for the domino jointer. Then measured equidistant spacing for the long horizontal pieces and marked the face perpendicular to where the spindles would join the frame. I did both the top and bottom horizontal pieces together in pairs to help ensure proper alignment. Then, with the domino jointer, I got to work cutting 10mm slots on either end of the long horizontal pieces and through the end grain of the type A vertical pieces. To expedite cutting the 5mm slots through the end grain of the spindles, I used a quickly whipped up jig. Then cut mirroring 5mm slots along the long horizontal frame pieces. After that, I gave the interior faces a finishing level sand down. Then it was time to glue up the long-sided frames. Once those had cured, I took all of the Type B vertical pieces, cut 10mm domino slots through their end grain and mirroring slots through either end of the short-sided horizontal pieces and glued those up as well. To enclose those two short-sided panels, I laminated two 5/8 inch thick panels. While those cured, I used a trim router to cut 5/8 inch rabbets on the interior edge of the frames. Then cut the panels down to size. Rounded over the corners to match the rounded corner left behind by the router. And gave them a finishing level sand down before anchoring them into place. I opted to use 1/4 inch oak pins that were angled slightly toward the frame to hold these into place. To finish off the crib panels, I cut a few 23-inch pieces at 45 degrees on either end. Then clamp them about 2 inches from the ends of the bottoms of the long panels and dead center on the bottoms of the short panels before marking the position for the domino recess across both faces. These would not only serve as the support for the mattress at the lowest convertible setting, but also be the anchor points between the feet and the crib. So after I placed the domino recesses, I took the 23-inch pieces to the table saw to cut a lap joint recess on the underside of each support. Then glued them into place. The short-sided pieces didn't need a recess, so they were simply glued. Time to set aside the crib panels and get to the feet. I started by cutting 2 long pieces that would lap together to form an X at 15 degrees on either end. Then found the center point, subtracted 29/32 of an inch from either side, or half the width of the recess that would make up the lap joint, and marked the outer edges for the lap joint. Using a digital protractor, I marked 2 parallel 35-degree angles from those marks. I did the same thing, but with the angles pointed in the opposite direction for the second long piece. Then, with the trim router in a few passes, I cleared most of the lap joint. I tidied up the edges with the chisel for the final fit. Pleased with the fit, I moved on to the actual feet. I measured and marked a line at 7 inches. Then used the protractor and straight edge to outline the angles of the feet, the outside angle being marked at 15 degrees to match the ends of the leg frame. Then, between the table saw and the miter saw, cut out the feet. Before using the domino again to anchor them to the lapped leg frame. To anchor this feet structure to the bed, I cut laps into the ends of 2 crossbeam pieces. These would be screwed into place on the leg frames, but the lap joint would fit into the recess cut into the bottom support of the cribs. To make sure I position the legs properly, I used some string to find the center mark before marking 2 midpoints for each foot where the screws would be sunk. I drilled a pilot hole, then a countersunk recess before sinking the screws. The last piece I needed to make was the mattress support frame. I started by cutting a 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch rabbet through 2 long-sided pieces. Then, again, I domino jointed 2 roughly 2 foot by 1.5 inch by 3/4 inch pieces between them on either end. To sturdy up the frame, I added 2 additional supports parallel to the long sides with some, you guessed it, lap joints. Happy with the frame for now, I turned to placing the last bit of hardware so that the bed could be bolted together. In the Type B or short-sided vertical frame pieces, I sank threaded inserts to mirror the recesses for the bolts in the Type A frame pieces. To give this crib its convertible quality, on the interior faces of the Type A pieces, I sank 2 sets of 4 threaded inserts, each set being equidistant from the top rail of the crib, 14 inches and 21 inches respectively. To create space for the bolt to meet these threaded inserts, I cut a recess in each corner of the mattress support frame. Then it was time to give everything a finishing level sand down. To finish the feet frame, I gave every edge except the top a round over with the trim router. And to help protect the future little tyke, I gave both the mattress support and corners of the crib a chamfer. To wrap up my cuts, I cut some 1x4 inch Lowe's pine as the bed frame slats. Then I worked on several coats of lacquer, scuff sanding after the first coat to knock down any spiny grain or imperfections before the other coats. Before adding lacquer to the crossbeam anchor supports, I thought it would be cute for the little guy's nuclear family to send some handwritten words of love and encouragement that I would use a Dremel to engrave into the crib. With the lacquer cured, it was time to assemble. And that's a wrap. I feel pretty honored to have been tapped to create this piece. It was built with a lot of love. Next time, I don't know what's happening next time. Maybe a chair, maybe some upgraded shop cabinetry. But if you want to be the first to know, join us over on Patreon. Not only will you find more behind the scenes footage, but starting now, I'll be posting project sneak peeks and more detailed build insights in the moment. To all my current patrons, I cannot thank you enough for your support. Until next time, or on Patreon.